Welcome on behalf of the University of Arizona Poetry Center, and thank you so much for joining us for this digital gallery talk by artist Laurie Wohl on her exhibit titled Birds of Longing, Exile and Memory. This presentation was originally scheduled for March 31st, 2020 at the Poetry Center, and while we're disappointed not to have been able to welcome Laurie to Tucson in person, we're very grateful to still be able to present this talk to you online. We specifically want to thank the Arizona Center for Judaic Studies for their support and co-sponsorship of this talk as part of the Sally and Ralph Duchin Campus Lecture Series. Thank you so much. Fiber artist Laurie Wohl is internationally known for her unique unweavings, liturgical projects, and interfaith message. We are grateful to have a portion of her collection of distinctive fiber art pieces, Birds of Longing, at the Poetry Center this spring. In this presentation, you will both see images of the pieces and hear Wohl talk about her work, specifically focusing on the way it utilizes sacred texts from the three Abrahamic religions, as well as contemporary poetry. Birds of Longing truly is a striking body of work, captivating the attention from across the room with its bright colors and textures, while also inviting viewers to come closer, to linger, and to reflect. For those of you who didn't have a chance to see Birds of Longing in person at the Poetry Center before the current closures, we invite you to visit the Poetry Center's homepage, where you can find images of the pieces as well as the text from the exhibit labels. You'll also see quite a bit of the pieces in this presentation itself. Wohl's works, recognized by the AIA Interfaith Forum on Religion, Art, and Architecture, and by the Surface Design Association, are held in the collections of the Museum of Arts and Design, American Bible Society, Constitutional Court of South Africa, Catholic Theological Union, and numerous other public and private collections. Her works have been on long-term loan to the United States embassies in Beirut, Vienna, Tunis, Cape Town, and Pretoria. Wohl lives and works in New York City, where she'll be joining us from today. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I'll turn it over to Laurie.
Those of you tuning in, thank you for visiting with us virtually during this very strange and unsettling time. I'd like to thank the Poetry Center, especially Julie and Sarah, and the Arizona Center for Judaic Studies for co-sponsoring this exhibit and this talk. This is such a special place to exhibit pieces from my Birds of Longing project, because as you will see, poetry is at the very heart of the project. I am an unweaver. My Unweavings fiber art pieces consist of unwoven canvas, textured papers, and other materials that serve as my medium for integrating visual and tactile elements with spiritual texts and poetry. The unwoven forms respond to, interpret, and embody the texts. Birds of Longing emerged from the many years I've spent contemplating and working with the relationship of texts and textiles. It began as my response to the events of September 11th, 2001, even as it incorporates new shocks and new tragedies that are with us daily. In 2001, living in New York City, seeing the ash-covered window displays in the shops near Ground Zero, arrested by the pictures all over the city of those lost, I thought of this striking passage which appears in both Ezekiel and in the book of Revelation. The hand of the Lord was upon me and set me down in the midst of the valley, which was fully of bones, and lo, they were very dry. And he said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? Again he said to me, prophesy over these bones. Thus says the Lord God to these bones, behold, I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. The valley of dry bones, an image of complete desolation, but then a message of hope and resurrection. In the years after September 11th, as Islam surfaced in mainstream political and cultural consciousness, seeing the increase in anti-Muslim hate crimes, and that non-Muslim Americans in general had very little understanding of Islam, I began to think about how I, as an artist, could contribute to a better understanding among Christians, Jews, and Muslims, to suggest a way that art can be used to mediate at the intersection of faith and politics. Ezekiel, in a somber palette, with the unwoven areas suggesting the architecture of the Twin Towers, was my first response to September 11th, with texts in Hebrew, English, and Greek calligraphy. Ezekiel became the beginning in 2010 of the Birds of Longing Exile and Memory project, in which I explore the relationship of the three Abrahamic religions with text, calligraphy, color, and form. I began by investigating poetry and spiritual texts from the Spanish medieval period, the Convivencia, a time when these religions coexisted relatively peacefully and influenced each other architecturally, culturally, and linguistically until the expulsion in 1492. At the same time as I was reading texts from this early period, I read widely in contemporary Middle Eastern poetry, making the acquaintance of poetry by Mahmoud Darwish and Yehuda Amichai, Adonis, Al-Bayati, Al-Qasim, Goldberg, Alterman, and many others. And through relating the medieval and the contemporary, I found the themes that constitute my project: spiritual love, exile, nostalgia for Andalusia, views of Jerusalem, poetry referencing Old and New Testament texts in the Quran, and poetry speaking of memory, justice, mistrust of enemies, and yearning for reconciliation. I construct visual narratives from these themes in combination with my own iconography. Birds of Longing, completed between 2010 and 2016, consists of 19 pieces. 7 pieces from the project are installed at the Poetry Center, and I will be talking about them and the poetry that inspired them in the context of other pieces in the project. Islam, like the Protestant and Jewish traditions, privileges text over image. I address these traditions by interweaving related texts using Arabic and Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and English calligraphy, as well as by incorporating Islamic architectural forms and color references used by the three religions during the Convivencia. A word about poetry. Poetry is sound. It's important that we hear as well as see the texts. Working with a composer and native speakers of Arabic and Hebrew, we recorded the poems and spiritual texts incorporated in the Unweavings, reading in English, Arabic, and Hebrew, with the spoken words interwoven against specially arranged music. In my 1.5 year research, I encountered a wealth of powerful, compelling poetry. As I introduce pieces, I'll highlight some of this poetry and play excerpts from the soundscape. Let's start with Spiritual Love and Prayer. Watchwords, which is installed at the Poetry Center, is the touchstone piece for the project. Suggesting the form of a talit or prayer shawl, the piece contains the statements of faith of the three Abrahamic religions, the Shema in Hebrew, the Shahada in Arabic, and words from the Nicene Creed in English, Greek, and Latin. Let's listen. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. We believe in
in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth and of all things visible and invisible. For the project, I also envisioned dance as another way of experiencing the poetry. Carla de Sola, the preeminent liturgical choreographer, responded enthusiastically to the project and composed a dance response to several pieces, which has been performed with exhibits in Berkeley and New York City. Let's watch this response to watchwords. Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. I believe in Allah, the one God, and I believe that Muhammad is God's messenger.
I believe in one God, the Almighty, maker of all that is, visible and invisible.
The arched form and colors in East of the Song of Songs are typical of Muslim architecture of the medieval period. The piece takes its theme from a poem by the contemporary Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, referring to the Hebrew Song of Songs. Go behind your shadow, east of the Song of Songs. If you're really my lover, compose a song of songs for me and etch my name into the trunk of a pomegranate tree in the gardens of Babylon. The curved form of A Secret of My Secret suggests an arc curtain, a prayer niche. I use gauze in the construction of this piece to allude to the mystery of spiritual love and to evoke the Islamic tradition of veiling. The title is from verse by the medieval Sufi mystic Hussein ibn Mansur al-Hallaj. O secret of my secret, so subtle, thou art veiled from all imaginations of all beings that have life. Conceived as a prayer scroll, Window of Prayers, which is installed at the Poetry Center, embodies the words of the medieval female Sufi mystic Rabia al-Adawiyya. Let's listen.
Al-Adawiyya.
Brethren, my rest is in my solitude, and my beloved is ever in my presence. He is my prayer niche.
راحتي يا إخوتي في خلوتي وحبيبي دائما في حضرتي فهو محرابي.
And there is verse from the contemporary Syrian poet Adonis from his poem, The New Noah. Let's listen. We sailed in the ark. Our oars were God's promises. Under the rain and dirt we survived, but not mankind. We went along with the waves, and the sky was like a rope of dead people on which we tied our lives. Through a window of prayers we reached the sky.
رحنا مع الفلك مجاديفنا وعد من الله وتحت المطر والوحل نحيا ويموت البشر. رحنا مع الموج وكان الفضاء حبلا من الموتى ربطنا به أعمارنا وكان بين السماء وبيننا نافذة للدعاء.
The piece also contains verse by Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. Yom Kippur sailors climb among ladders and ropes of well-tested prayers. The air over Jerusalem is saturated with prayers and dreams. This is Tree of Light, which is installed at the Poetry Center. The tree form, trunk, and roots alludes to the blessed light-giving olive tree of the Quran. From Quran Surah 24, God is the light of the heavens and the earth, lit from a blessed tree, an olive, neither of the east nor of the west. Let's listen to the Arabic.
الله نور السماوات والأرض يوقد من شجرة مباركة زيتونة لا شرقية ولا غربية.
I link this Quranic passage to texts from Psalms, Revelation, and Darwish, all evoking the olive tree as a symbol of light and life. The next pieces embody themes of exile, nostalgia, and memory. The theme of exile is striking in contemporary Middle Eastern poetry and in the Hebrew and Arabic poetry of the medieval period in Spain. Even before 1492, the expulsion of Spain's Jews and the fall of Granada, which was the last remaining Muslim territory in Andalusia, these communities were displaced internally from one area of Spain to another as Christian forces advanced. So then, as now, exile refers to both internal displacement and external displacement. Early feelings of exile are found in the familiar words of Psalm 137 and are incorporated in Babylon, the unwoven form suggesting a river. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. Let's listen to the Hebrew.
על נהרות בבל, שם ישבנו, גם בכינו, בזוכרנו את ציון.
And from Darwish, we have these words expressing displacement and exclusion with their reference to Babylon, the Bible's archetypical place of exile. We came with the wind from Babylon, and we marched to Babylon. The unwoven tent form of Elegy for Cordoba was inspired by almost identical imagery employed by a Muslim and a Jewish poet writing 100 years apart in Andalusia in the 11th and 12th centuries. From Abu Amr ibn Shuhaid, there is no one at the abandoned campsite to tell us about the loved ones, and they were scattered in all directions. And from Moses ibn Ezra, the campsites are mute, they do not answer me. With their tents, they wandered. The Arabic words across the top and above the unwoven cross form of carrying the sun are by the Iraqi poet Abdul Wahab al-Yati. Let's listen. The rats of the fields of words buried the head of the poet in a field of ashes, but the poet on the cross of exile carried the sun and flew.
شرذان حقول الكلمات دفنوا رأس الشاعر في حقل رماد، لكن الشاعر فوق صليب المنفى حمل الشمس وطار.
The piece also includes crucifixion and resurrection texts from John 19, Luke 24, the prophet Isaiah, and the medieval poet Solomon ibn Gabirol. There is also nostalgia for another time, another place, caused by feelings of distance and exile. Unwoven in an abstract wing form, Birds of Longing, which is installed at the Poetry Center, references the poem To the Bird by the 19th century poet Bialik. He imagined a bird migrating from Palestine to his window in Odessa, bringing warmth to what he felt as the cold of exile, expressing longing for the promised land to which he finally emigrated. Yehuda Amichai builds on this theme in his poem, The Windmill at Yemen Moshe. Let's listen. This windmill never ground flour. It ground holy air and Bialik's birds of longing. It ground words and ground time. It ground rain and even shells, but it never ground flour. Now it's discovered us and grinds our lives day by day, making out of us the flour of peace, making out of us the bread of peace for the generation to come.
התחנה הזאת מעולם לא תחנה קמח. היא תחנה אוויר קדוש וציפורי געגועים של ביאליק.
I also incorporate this question from Darwish. Where should we go after the last frontiers? Where should the birds fly after the last sky? Andalusia Lost incorporates the arch typical of Convivencia architecture, using the colors of that period, and continues the theme of exile and nostalgia, by the Jewish poet Abraham ibn Ezra within Spain during the Convivencia, the exile felt by Darwish and Albiati as contemporary poets, looking back at that period in Andalusia as the Islamic Golden Age. From Andalusian poet Abraham ibn Ezra, alone over there, exile resided. I moan like an owl for the town of Lucena, where exile dwelled, guiltless and strong. Cordoba is abandoned, ruined, like the desolate sea. Can there be a return? Darwish answers, if I were to start all over again, I'd travel again on the road which may or may not lead to Cordoba. I will return if I have to return to my roses, but I will never go back to Cordoba. For the poet, the Andalusian Golden Age can never be recovered. And these poets continue the conversation in The Shores of Loss, which is also installed at the center. Contemporary Saudi poet Hassan Abdallah al-Qarashi writes, how confused, oh wonder, is the song on the shores of loss. And Amakai writes, here at the shore of Ashkelon, we arrived at the end of memory. And from contemporary Syrian poet Adonis, in his poem, The New Noah, this verse, let's listen. We have returned from our wanderings. We have come out of the cave and changed the sky of years. We are sailing and fear cannot bend us, and we do not listen to God's word. We have an appointment with death. We have become familiar with our shores of despair. We have grown to accept its frozen sea with iron water, and we sail through it to its end. We carry on moving and never listen to that God. We long for a new God.
رحنا مع الفلك مجاديفنا وعد من الله وتحت المطر والوحل نحيا ويموت البشر.
Jerusalem, of course, is the much dreamed of, much contested site of the three Abrahamic religions. My Jerusalem is composed of three unwoven dome shapes. It incorporates reflections about different aspects of Jerusalem in Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic. From the book of Revelation, a vision of the New Jerusalem. From Revelation 21, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. I also saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. From Amakai, we have a Jerusalem drenched in pain. Jerusalem stone is the only stone that can feel pain. And from the Palestinian poet Darwish, a profound question. I look out over the procession of ancient prophets climbing barefoot to Jerusalem. I ask, is there a new prophet for this new time? Justice, too, is a preoccupation of the poets from the time of the prophets. Will there be enough justice, which is installed at the center includes this poetry from the prophet Amos. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And from Darwish, we have this question, and say to him, to Mary's son, how could you do to us what you did to yourself? Sir, do we have enough justice so that we'll be just tomorrow? I include text from Matthew, and you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness, and this pessimistic reflection from Amichai. The vines I've sat under, the fig tree, all are words. The rustling of leaves gives an illusion of God and of justice. Finally, I want to highlight the companion pieces summarizing the questions and prayers of the project. Will there yet come the struggle of destinies? And will there yet come a grain of hope? Lamentations 1 sets the context for the struggle of destinies, which is also installed at the center. Let's listen. This is why I weep and my eyes overflow with tears. No one is near to comfort me, no one to restore my spirit. My children are destitute because the enemy has prevailed.
הלילה אני בוכייה, עיני יורד המים, כי רחק ממני, מנחם משיב נפשי. היו בניי שוממים, כי גבר אויב.
Against this lament, I set this question from Israeli poet Leah Goldberg. Will there yet come days of forgiveness and grace? And from the Syrian poet Al-Bayati, your cries were my cries. Our rivalry is pointless. I am tired of mortal competition and the struggle of destinies. Amichai adds, half of the people love, half hate. And where shall I find my place between these halves who suit each other so? And there is a prayer in the words of Sami al-Qasim, who was a Palestinian Druze and Israeli citizen. On the day you kill me, you'll find in my pocket travel tickets to peace, to the fields and the rain, to people's conscience. Don't waste the tickets. Let's listen.
عندما أقتل في يوم من الأيام سيعثر القاتل في جيبي على تذاكر السفر، واحدة إلى السلام، واحدة إلى الحقول والمطر، واحدة إلى ضمائر البشر.
Will there yet come a grain of hope in Talit form circles back to the form for watchwords. I juxtapose Leah Goldberg's question, will there yet come days of forgiveness and grace, with Darwish's yearning for salam, peace. Salam is two enemies longing, each separately, to yawn on boredom's sidewalk. And Amichai suggests in a poem called The Place Where We Are Righteous, from the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. Can we act as enjoined in 1 Peter and in Psalm 34? Seek peace and pursue it. Can we achieve Micah's vision? Every man shall sit under his fig tree, and none shall make him afraid. I hope in Birds of Longing, by the juxtaposition of poetry and spiritual texts from the 3 Abrahamic religions, to encourage understanding and to pose challenges. Can we give up ancient animosities, give up defining ourselves through them? Can we give up the struggle of destinies? As Darwish has written, what will I do, what will we do without exile? And Darwish raises the crucial question of the role of memory. This is forgetfulness, that you remember the past and not remember tomorrow in the story? What is the role of memory? The Christian poet Denise Levertov writes in her poem, The Great Unknowing, memory demands so much. Lift me with you, take me off this ground of memory that clings to my feet like thick clay. And Amichai cries out, the burden is too great. Let the memorial hill remember instead of me. Let the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens eat and remember. Let all of them remember so that I can rest. Excuse me, where can I find the public forgetter? How shall we remember? Enough? Too much? What shall we remember? And for how long? As discussed earlier, several of the pieces in the project are in conversation about exile. We are now living in another age of displacement. We are confronted with heartbreaking tragedies when once again staggering numbers of people are fleeing persecution and violence, undertaking unimaginably difficult and dangerous journeys, and are denied refuge, often painfully separated from one another. Is it possible for us to welcome the stranger, to recognize the stranger in ourselves? Can we remember that we were all strangers? As Matthew says, for I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And from Isaiah, is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free? A United Nations report released in June 2019 showed that 70.8 million people were displaced as of the end of 2018. 41.3 million of these displaced internally. Collectively, the numbers are staggering, and individually they are devastating. An estimated 37,000 people are forcibly displaced every day. 5 countries account for 2/3 of the displaced, with Syria and Afghanistan at the top of the list, followed by South Sudan, Myanmar, and Somalia. As the situation in the Middle East spirals downward and xenophobia is encouraged abroad and in our own country, at our own borders, I believe it is urgent to engage one another in continuing multi-faith and multicultural conversations. My hope for Birds of Longing is that it will make vivid the connections among the Abrahamic religions and stimulate thought about their shared emotional, aesthetic, thematic, and spiritual content. I hope here to bear witness, mindful of the obligation to work toward tikkun olam, repair of the world. I hope to suggest a different way of seeing, of hearing, and to offer healing. In conclusion, I offer this poem by Denise Levertov. I have a small grain of hope, one small crystal that gleams clear colors out of transparency. I need more. I break off a fragment to send you. Please take this grain of hope so that mine won't shrink. Please share your fragment so that yours will grow. Only so, by division, will hope increase, like a clump of irises, which will cease to flower, unless you distribute the clustered roots, unlikely source, clumsy and earth-covered, of grace. Thank you.
All right, Laurie, thank you so much for that presentation. That was really wonderful to just to have a chance to hear you talk and to see some of the details of those pieces, both the ones that are at the Poetry Center and the full set of pieces. It's an amazing project and so much work. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us. So I just wanted to ask you a few questions. In a gallery talk in person, we would give people a chance to come up and chat with you after, but since we can't do that, I figure having a short conversation hopefully will give people some additional insight. So the first question I wanted to ask is that several visitors who did get to see the pieces at the Poetry Center were curious about the construction of them. So can you just tell us a little bit more about how you put these physical pieces together?
Right, and this is a question that many people have at every exhibit and presentation. As I said at the very beginning, I'm an unweaver, so I start with 12-ounce cotton canvas, and I unweave it into different shapes, which means I take out the warp or the weft threads to release either longer or shorter threads to make the different shapes, the tree forms, the prayer shawls, the window shapes, all the different shapes. And that was a real revelation to me, how much you could do just by unweaving canvas, taking the material that painters usually use mainly as a surface and actually getting inside the material. And that's been part of my process, is to sort of see what's inside and then reconstruct it. So I'm deconstructing, or as a friend said, I'm becoming completely unstrung, and then I put it back together again. After I unweave the canvas, after that I put on the calligraphy and my own iconography, and that is all outlined with an acrylic paste called modeling paste, which I drip off the end of a very small brush, and which other people have said, isn't that tedious, and don't you want to find a faster way to do it? But for me, it's more of a meditative process, and this is all about process, really, unweaving and the kind of work I do. It's not to hurry to get it done, but to be involved in the putting it back together, really. And then the last thing I do, or the next to last thing I do, is to apply the paint in many different thin layers. And that's what I call pulling the rabbit out of the hat, where I hope the magic comes in and it pulls all together, and it shows itself organically. And then the very last thing is the application of the beads, which are prayers, they're marking points, indicating thoughts I have as I'm working on it. And also just artistically, they're another way of painting with shape and color and form. The same with the collaged papers that are on the pieces and some of the textures. For instance, in Tree of Light, I use sand and pumice on the surface of that as well to give it even more texture.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a lot of connections between the content of the pieces and the process of making them, that it's slow, it's contemplative. Do you feel like that's true, like that the making these pieces kind of embodies what they're saying?
Oh, that's my hope, and
Yeah.
I hope I convey that. Yes, and the form that I unweave has to be related to the content of the texts that I'm inspired by or that are embedded in the piece. So there's really a back and forth between the thoughts, the text, and the form of the piece and what I'm trying to convey.
Do you feel like you usually go into it with a complete idea of what it's going to come out looking like at the end, or does it morph along the way?
I usually have a pretty clear idea of what I want to happen. But of course, there are always improvisations along the way.
Yeah.
But especially for this project, especially since there was so much wonderful poetry, and I didn't know in the beginning how many pieces I would do. And but if you're doing a project that has many pieces, you want it to be interesting and not repetitive. So in addition to finding the poetry and the themes, I had to figure out the shapes that would convey these things and make sure that there was enough difference among pieces, both in the shape and the colors and such, so that it would be interesting. Originally, I stopped at 15 pieces, but then I hadn't done Justice and Memory and Chaos at Resurrection's Gate, so I decided I had to do those. But then after that, I thought that was really enough. I mean, I could have kept going, but it's really enough.
Yeah, no, I mean, so many pieces, and it's interesting in your talk to hear you kind of go through the development of the ideas, the way that it kind of went from one starting place into kind of a much bigger sphere of what it's reaching toward or what it's expressing. It was wonderful to see the poetry throughout. At the Poetry Center, we pulled out the books that you had the poems from, which I'm sorry that we can't share that with people digitally, but it was really nice to see that selection of poets. So I was just curious, were there any kind of personal favorites or new poets for you that you've kept coming back to and that you discovered through this project?
They were all new to me, both medieval and contemporary. I gave myself a crash course in medieval and contemporary Middle Eastern poetry. I mean, it was amazing to me. My personal favorite is Mahmoud Darwish and Yehuda Amichai. And there's such variety in their poetry and what they talk about and the feelings they convey in it. And I believe that they interacted with each other in some way too, while they were alive, and respected each other as well.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to another question I wanted to ask was about collaboration. So we heard those recorded pieces throughout, and we saw the dance that was choreographed. So how does collaboration impact your work, both for this project or more broadly?
Well, collaboration is really wonderful, and it's a lonely life in the studio when you're just working on your own. As you probably know, being a poet, I mean, you're just there. So opportunities to collaborate enliven you really, and I really look forward to those. You have to make those opportunities happen, obviously. So I reached out to this choreographer. It was important to me. Poetry, in addition to sound, poetry embodies movement to me also. And my pieces, because of the loosening of the threads, they catch the air currents, and there's movement in the pieces too. And I also work to music, so there's a lot of movement generally. And so I wanted there to be dance, and Carla was very generous and choreographed 4 different pieces, and that was wonderful. And we collaborated. She chose the pieces that spoke to her, and choreographed for those. And then she asked me for input on the costumes, the colors of the scarves, things like that. I also collaborated with a young woman in Indianapolis when the project was presented there at the Interchurch Center, and also at the JCC. And it was a young woman who has a Sacred Dance Institute, and she did it quite differently. She gave a long performance on a stage, actually, not within the exhibit, but just on the stage, a separate thing. And we talked a lot about what she was going to do. So that was fun. In terms of the recording, that was wonderful. I had to find native speakers of Arabic and Hebrew, and I'm based in New York, and I sent letters around to all the Middle Eastern studies departments and Judaic studies department of the universities in the area, seeing if there was anybody who might be interested. And I was very fortunate. I got a young woman from Ramallah who was studying history at NYU, and she agreed to work on the Arabic with me. And then a young man from Yeshiva University who is a native Israeli. And so we did these recordings. The person doing the recordings, the composer, is Daniel Wohl, who is my nephew. And we had a wonderful time doing this. And he adapted music from Maya Beiser's album Provenance with her permission to use just for this project. So that was really, really fantastic. I've done some large-scale collaborations with 2 dance companies, one in Chicago and one in New York, where I was working, not doing a normal kind of set, but taking 130 strips of fabric that the dancers could dance with and make processions with, and you could see behind them because these were made of gauze, but these were 130 strips of fabric, of gauze fabric that were strung on 3 rows of parallel wires. And of course, collaborating with dancers is an incredible, wonderful experience like that. And some of the figures that you'll see in my iconography were directly inspired by the dance positions that the dancers took. And we had a wonderful time. So I went to a 1.5 years of rehearsals for the Chicago one, and we really collaborated deeply on it. So it was fantastic. And their dance piece was called Unweavings. So.
Okay. Yeah, it's wonderful to see. That was another question people had in seeing the pieces in person, was about the iconography, the small people, which I think people will have seen in this presentation. They're small people doing a variety of things. as well as many birds. But it's wonderful to think about, real dancers doing that, being reflected in the pieces. And also just, I think of poetry as being very embodied. It's very much, even when you're reading it on the page, it's coming from the voice, which is coming from inside the body. So all those connections make a lot of sense to me.
Oh, that's terrific.
So just as a final concluding question, what are you working on right now, or maybe now in a broad sense, since we're kind of in a tough moment to be focusing and getting a lot of work done?
Yes, well, I have set up a mini studio in my apartment, and I had to stop working on several pieces. My large project is a long-term project, much like Birds of Longing, and grows out of Birds of Longing, as you alluded to before. This project will be on refugees and immigrants, and I've been reading extensively, and it's very somber reading. And I've put that aside at the moment because we're in a time now where I sort of need all the energy I can have to keep spirit up. So what I'm doing now is a series of small pieces, because I have to work on a very small scale right now, of meditation pieces using a mantra that is meaningful to me from my meditation practice. And so there will be a small series of that. Right now, I'm just thinking about it and researching and doing lettering. Researching because this is coming, some of it from the Jewish tradition, and I'm researching some of the aspects of that. And then I will have to sit and think about what forms these are going to take.
That sounds great. And it's, I think it's wise to kind of, to know when to step back or to step away from something and to let what else is coming take over. It sounds like you found a good direction to go in for right now. And I look forward to when you can go back to that larger project as well.
I do too.
Yeah.
So,
thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And we're really thankful to have you here, and just looking forward to sharing this talk with everybody.